Alright, I'm Quincas with Vinicius Electrik, and today we're going to take a look at the MultiWaves module, which is a really cool full-featured modulation source module as well as a VCO. So let's get right to it. Basically, it's three modules in one. Two of them are analog LFOs that are very simple but very, very useful. So it's these two right here. Each has an output that reflects the position of the symmetry knob here. So let's take a look. It's actually a triangle wave. As you see right there, we can actually hear it because it goes up into audio rate. We can do like some basses with it. So there you see a perfect analog triangle wave, and when you turn the symmetry knob, you sweep it from a rising ramp to a falling ramp and anywhere in between, right? So this is really cool, and it goes into audio rate, but of course also very slow. When you are in the super slow mode, the CV width pot actually affects it too, so it becomes sort of a fine frequency control, so you can get into super slow LFO territory. The LEDs are bipolar and they show the state of the LFO, of the CV coming out of there, and you also get a square wave. There you go, which I often use as a clock source, for example. And yeah, and this is the other one. They're identical. They both have the same controls, same response features and everything. So that's that. I consider them auxiliary LFOs. I end up using them a lot in conjunction with the left side. The left side is the digital side of the MultiWaves, and here you have a selection of waves, a large selection of waves, rather than just having the square and the tiltable triangle. So for example, right here is a triangle wave. Let's turn the amplitude down a little bit so we see it in the oscilloscope accurately. This is a digital triangle, and it does go well into the audio range, as you can see. Even though it's still on LFO mode, this module has a VCO mode. There's an LED over here that lights up. Once you go through the waves once, the second time will be VCO mode. And the only difference is it shifts up in frequency range, meaning it won't go quite as low, but it'll go much higher once you're in VCO mode, even though it already goes into audio range when you're in LFO mode. So you have two frequency ranges, one more appropriate for audio use and one more appropriate for modulation source use. And this side also has a symmetry control. So with the triangle wave, it acts exactly the same as the symmetry control on the analog ones over here, but it also works on every single wave. So here's the sine wave, and you can tilt it too. And listen to that, it sounds really cool, because the sine wave, when it's centered, it has only the fundamental, it doesn't have any harmonics. But as you tilt it, it becomes something very similar to a saw wave. So this is a very cool function to have in this module if you use it as a VCO, because you don't even need a filter to vary the timbre and to add and remove harmonics according to your need, especially because there is a symmetry CV input right here. For example, I can plug in one of my slow LFOs here into the symmetry input, and there you go. You see that wave dancing, and you can hear the harmonics fading in and out. So for drones and stuff, this is really cool. It's also really cool to use as a modulation source, all the way down, modulating a sine wave from a different oscillator or something like that. So here's the cosine wave. Doesn't look like it changed much, didn't change anything at all. It's actually identical to the sine wave, except when you apply symmetry variation. Look at that. Instead of you getting a saw one side or the other, you get like skinny at the bottom, fat at the top, or skinny at the top, fat at the bottom. More like a pulse width on a square wave kind of effect. So that's the only difference between the cosine and the sine wave. or the way that they respond to the symmetry control, symmetry variation. This wave right here is called the peak wave, and it also responds to symmetry. Sounds kind of pulse wavy too. And of course, I'm leaving these in audio rates so we can hear what they sound like, but this mode is intended as a modulation source. Right, and the last wave, we didn't see all the waves. I'll go through again, but I'll show you the last one, which is white noise, right? And with the symmetry control, you vary the density of the noise. So you get from something that's quite analog sounding, sounds a lot like just a straight up white noise, to something very digital sounding that sounds more like an explosion in River Raid in an Atari 2600 or something like that. And also you can vary that by sending CV to the symmetry, right? It's kind of like a helicopter right there. Now another thing that's cool about this module is I said it's 3 modules, but it's actually 4 modules because it has a dedicated independent noise section right here, which is similar to the noise algorithm in the main LFO, the main digital LFO. But it has its own noise density control right here, a manual one, and again you go from something very like lo-fi digital sounding to something more fine and analog sounding, right? And there's also a CV for the noise density. Again, that's almost like a helicopter, like a space helicopter or something going on. Cool, so that's the noise. Now let's go back to the main output here. That's the main output noise. It's different. You can actually use both of them as noise sources and have different noises. For something percussive maybe, or for something more textural or whatever, right? So let's continue pressing this button right here. Now it entered into VCO mode, right? Which just, there you go. You can go much higher. It's not supersonic, but it's certainly high enough for anything melodic or sound designy or harmonic that you might want to do. So it works perfectly as an oscillator, and it still goes down to somewhat of a sub-audio LFO type rate. So that's cool. That was the upward saw, this is the downward saw. This is the square wave, which the symmetry now becomes pulse width, as it makes sense that it would. And it goes all the way to silence, to like where you get just a line at the bottom, a line at the top. And again, you can modulate that by sending CV to the symmetry control, right? Now, there's a triangle, and that's where we started when I started showing you this. So if I go through, again, all of them, notice that there's no noise in VCO mode. So it'll just skip and go back into LFO mode, and now we're back at a rising ramp LFO, falling ramp LFO. The symmetry control on the ramps doesn't sound very different, but as you can see, it goes from exponential to logarithmic as far as making a curve, which will sound very different when you use it as a modulation source, right? So yeah. Now, oh, you think that's it? No, that's not it, because this module has a built-in sample and hold, right? And the sample and hold button engages as soon as you turn it up from off. It engages and starts making your wave stepped, right? So let's get to, in order to get a good listen to this, I'm gonna put the lizard in sine wave, high definition sine wave mode, and pick up the audio from there, right? Just turn that down a little bit so we can see that wave. And now we're gonna send this guy, the MultiWaves, as a modulation source into the FM input here. We'll turn that FM input up. And okay, we're really fast right now, so this is like like audio rate. Now let's go into the triangle. We'll make a slow triangle, and we'll turn up that sample and hold, and you can hear that it becomes stepped rather than continuous. And the more I turn the sample and hold knob upwards, the slower the internal clock of the sample and hold is, and the longer the steps are, right? Until at the end it just stops, and you get this LED that lights up right over a jack called external clock. And that's a feature I requested because I love synchronizing my sample and hold to whatever else I'm doing. So sometimes I have a master clock running a few sequencers, and I like to use that same master clock to synchronize the sample and hold. So of course with the triangle you get this like stepped ramp that goes up and down, and now I'm controlling its clock with this other LFO here. I'm using the square wave output of the auxiliary LFO, and you get you can vary that frequency too, and that can be cool. Now what I really love about this is doing like R2D2 type things by just going into the noise as a source for the sample and hold. And then you get random voltage, which is really awesome. So here's your R2D2 happening right here. Maybe you can turn down the FM width to make it vary not so much. And you can even send the random output if you use like a little splitter. So I got these little stars here. I can take the splitter and split the random output into the frequency of the lizard as an oscillator, as well as the frequency of the clock itself. So I now get a random clock as well as random voltage. And this sounds even more like an R2D2 or like a mainframe computer in a spaceship in a 60s movie or something like that. There's the hard sync input too, just like a hard sync input you would find on any oscillator. So let's go back to listening to the output here. We'll turn off the sample and hold. We'll turn that up a little bit, and now we'll send we'll send the output of the lizard into the hard sync input here, and now we can have that that sync sound. Sounds cool in the saw wave too. Let's use saw wave in VCO mode. So there you go. That's just to show that the hard sync works. There's a square wave output too, which can be cool if you want to somehow synchronize your LFO to a sequencer or something. But it's always nice to have a square wave output over here. Here it is. Right. And now I'm using pulse width modulation while listening to the square output. That's pretty cool. That is the MultiWaves module. It's a super cool multifunctional module that serves many purposes in a system. I always end up using it for something, even if it's just one of the auxiliary LFOs. These are really nice analog LFOs with CV control and the tiltable wave with the symmetry control here. The width control, when there's nothing plugged in, becomes a fine tune for the speed. So yeah, I think that's all she wrote about the MultiWaves module. I hope you liked this video, and stay tuned for the next one, which will be about the overfolder module. And stay noisy. See you soon. All right.